Welcome to the last episode of this year on Pascal's China Lens, and this time we're going to talk about inclusion. I thought ending the year talking about how China is trying to close the gap between rich, poor, young and old, and how basically that inclusion is happening is actually a good way to end 2020. And next week I'm going to talk more about the regulations and the rule of law that is changing in China. Very interesting to understand how China is changing to become maybe more closer to what we are accustomed to in the West. So do subscribe to my channel to see the things next year happening for a new China in 2021. The next thing I want to talk about, trend 2021, is about the societal trends in 2021. And one of the most important ones, and I think one of the words that I really like about China, is this trying to get more inclusion. It's about closing the gap between rich and poor, old and young, and closing gaps. That's really what it's about. Because this has to do with keeping the country stable. Now, if you look 30 years ago, 1990, when I was in China the very first time, then there was still 754 million people living below the extreme poverty line. That's less than $2 a day. Back then it was $1 a day. So what that means is that these were extremely poor people that could almost barely survive on food and the money they had. So that's the problem. And in 30 years' time, China completely took out extreme poverty. I mean, the government helped a lot, both the central government, the local government, but also tech companies and producers and manufacturers. They helped a lot because they got incentives from the government. So there was a lot of collaboration to get these people out of poverty. And that is a real miracle of China. So there's officially no more extreme poverty in China. Now, there's still a lot of poor people in China, but these poor people are moving up on the social mobility scale very, very quickly. And they've been doing it over the past 30 years, and they're still continuing doing that today. And one of the main reasons, or one of the things that changed China completely, is the mobile payment. And that, of course, if you look at the West, it didn't take off so quickly because you had to use Apple Pay, for example, and that means you needed NFC, you needed a machine to actually scan things, and so there was a lot of investment that you needed to do. But in China, just a QR code, any smartphone, even the cheapest smartphone, which is less than $100, you could just scan, pay, and you're done. And so this is what it's all about. In China, they created this infrastructure, this environment, where any vendor could get paid from anyone without having to do any cost, and that got them up their social mobility because they have more trade that could happen. Even on your electricity bill in China, there's a QR code, you can scan it, you can pay it, you don't need to go to the office, you don't need to waste 2-3 hours to go to the office of the tax office or the electricity bill office, you don't need to waste 2-3 hours. So that's really the difference. Another part of the inclusion is about the farmers. There's still 300 million farmers in China. And all these farmers are kind of in the poor area, most of them. They're not extreme poor anymore, that's gone, but there are still 600 million people living on less than 150 euro a month, so that's not a lot of money. And so they sometimes have problems because all the money that they are getting is getting from the middleman, the people in between them and the customer at the end. And so Pinduoduo, which we explained before, and I've made a great video about that online, is actually a company that is helping these companies to create this environment. What that means is that these farmers could now directly talk to the consumers, as we talked in the consumer part last time. But these farmers, because of that, they're earning more money, they're earning more respect from consumers, and that means that they are getting out of that social gap that they were in, and they're becoming richer. And so very important to close that gap. And so what the government wants to do is to bring all these poor people, so not the extreme poor, that's gone, but the poor people into the third, fourth, and fifth tier cities of China. They want to get them into these emerging cities. It's these cities which are comparable to how Shanghai or Beijing was 20 or 25 years ago. But they're going so fast, these third, fourth, and fifth tier cities. And some of them is like hundreds of thousands of people, some even millions of people. And so all of these people don't have the same money as the people in Shanghai or Beijing, but they're all wanting to work hard, and they're moving up this ladder. And Beijing and the government in China wants to get all these poor people into the cities or closer working with the cities so they can move up together, so they can keep the stability of the world, the stability of China. The big trend for 2021 is really going to be extending that trend that was already started to get these third, fourth and fifth tier cities moving up into the inclusion and getting that gap between rich and poor slower or smaller, as small as it can. The other thing is about age. There's 250 million people in China that are 60 years or older. So lots of old people. And they didn't really follow this digital transformation the same as the young people did. But the digital natives, which are the biggest consumers in China, have been through the pandemic last year, or 2020, have been teaching and helping their elders or helping the older people to cope with it and to understand how to use these applications. And what you've seen is that the government, lots of companies have been really helping those people that were excluded because maybe they didn't have a smartphone or they didn't know how to use it, to actually follow with them on that train of digital transformation. It's a massive project, but it's happening very, very quickly. And this is all about inclusion. The last thing I want to say about inclusion, which inclusion is really interesting because it's a topic we don't often talk about. It's change of the Chinese society on itself. And so one of the things that we do in the West when we want to have change is create some kind of a revolution. If we voice what we say, then change can happen. This is a very Western way of thinking. Chinese, much more sensitive about how they do it, because, I mean, revolutions is not what you want in China. We all know about what happened in Hong Kong. So China has a different word for that. In China, revolution means 改革, but they're talking about jianzhi. And I wanted to share this because this word, jianzhi, is actually getting the same result as a revolution, but what's happening is much more from a social level than from a disagreement level. And so what they do is jianzhi is actually, that means like constructing in a more organized way to create a social norm. It's basically creating the social underlying trust and underlying belief of lots of people on social networks specifically, to start raising and commenting and reposting what they feel society should change into. And the Me Too movement is one of the good examples. You see there on the picture, and the Me Too is really about some woman coming outside in front of the court in Beijing saying, we want more inclusion, we want different things. And this is not about saying we want completely everything changed, but they have so much people on social media backing this that they're allowed to sit there. And so this is not an image we often see, but change happens faster and faster in China by the governments because of this social change, which is what we call jianzhi, which is organized, I wouldn't call it dissatisfaction, but organized constructive thinking and positive planning, which exchange examples are embedded into it. A little bit difficult to understand if you've not lived in China, but it's creating a lot of change. Think about LGBTQ, think about Black Lives Matter. I mean, all of these things that are happening in the West are happening in China too, but in a different way and a little bit at a different pace. The inclusion gap is critical to understand China. So we ended the year with a video on inclusion. And I believe, personally, I'm very convinced of this, that we in the West can learn a lot from how China is handling the inequality that is just getting bigger and bigger everywhere in the world. And they're doing major efforts. So we should look at China to get some inspiration on how to include more people into the society of the future. Next week, I'm going to talk about regulations and laws and basically how China wants to become what I call a good police. Now, it's going to be interesting to see because this could change business climate in China in the next year. I wish you a very good 2021. Happy New Year, and see you all back again after the New Year in a new year that can only be better than the last year has been.